All right, new edition of the Winning Plays podcast is here. We have another trade to react to. My name is Brian Robb. I am joined by Souichi Terada of MassLive, who will be reacting to another trade from the Celtics offseason. Carsen Edwards and Kris Dunn are out. Juancho Hernangomez is in from the Memphis Grizzlies. There's also a swap of 2026 second round picks, a huge aspect to the deal. But Suichi, let's just start with the deal itself. The Celtics, Brad Stevens has been busy this offseason with just a variety of moves, and this is another one on the list here.
Yeah, I always like to think second rounders in the future are 14, 13, 14-year-olds now. So that's always a fun wrinkle to any trade. Yeah, another trade, B-Rob. I mean, we texted about it. Just it feels like they always nick and dime us with these smaller trades. It's nothing. I guess there have been a couple bigger trades, like with Kemba when I was on PTO and you had to deal with that. But for the most part, it's just kind of dropped on you and you just go with it. But yeah, I think if you look at the roster, and we've been writing about it the past few weeks, it really felt like Kris Dunn and Carsen Edwards' time with the Boston Duns, especially as short as it was very limited, especially after summer league and what we saw from Carsen Edwards and everything. And I think we made this note, like when we talked to Brad post summer league, so I want to say like mid August ish, we were talking about how Brad talked about. It seemed like every person, every new acquisition, whether it was summer league or even Yam and Juhan and all those guys, but he kind of left Kris Dunn off and kind of gave off the vibes that one, obviously they were shopping him as we know now, but two, it just didn't seem like he was going to be stick around for a long time. So that kind of came to fruition, and here we are talking about another trade.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you made about, again, like the press conference where Brad had kind of addressed everything, and he mentioned everyone except for Kris Dunn, and now it's kind of just like, oh, okay, because Kris Dunn, like, he could have made sense for this roster, but then they signed Dennis Schroeder, so then once that happened, it was like, all right, like, you gonna play him over Pritchard and Langford? Like, I don't think that was, that didn't look like that was the plan.
Yeah, and it just, especially once you had Josh Richardson, it just felt like you had kind of the same. I felt like he was kind of the same type of player, but also just a little bit worse to the point where it's like you don't really see a path to playing time either. So it's just between all those factors and just considering his age and considering the other guys' age with Romeo and Payton, you want to see more of what they can do this season. And you got a guy like Kris Dunn, who I believe was a $5 million contract, who's going to be expiring. Like, there just wasn't, I think, much incentive to be like, hey, let's see what this guy has for the future of the team. It was more like, hey, let's see what we can get for this guy, which wasn't much, but I think Hernangomez should be like a solid piece at the end of the day, which is pretty much all you're looking for from a depth perspective at this point in the offseason.
Yeah, it really is. And so, I mean, that was kind of an area they just didn't address on the roster throughout the offseason, that, backup power forward spot. They had a couple guys there, in Grant Williams and Jabari Parker that, obviously can be contributors, but each, I think, have fair flaws or weaknesses in their games. And Hernangomez at least has someone who can, fill in some of those gaps from at least from a 3-point shooting standpoint. I think, again, and I think he's just like, he has size, like he's 6'9", and so
Mm-hmm.
I don't think necessarily he plays big. Like, I think he's more of a perimeter player than,
Yeah.
again, I don't know, but at least he's, defensively, at least, like, that's at least a bigger body you can throw in there at, whereas Grant Williams is maybe 6'4" with like his shoes on. So it's like, he's a good defender, but he just, doesn't have that size for like a lot of situations.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that backup power forward kind of ends up winning out. Obviously, you got a guy like Jabari who showed flashes, but at the same time, just I think people were kind of happy with how he played in game one against the Warriors, and he faded. And obviously, he had that. I think it was game one or two against the Nets in the playoffs. So I'm really curious to see how that ends up, just because Jabari and Hernangomez, I feel generally aren't necessarily the same player, just because of Jabari's defensive limitations in a lot of ways. So just
You're being nice
just
to me.
well, he's only been here for however many games, so we'll see how that ends up. But just you feel good about it, I think, if you're a Celtics fan, just because, hey, it's another depth piece, and this wasn't like we always knew. We've said this the past few weeks too, for the last month really, that whatever the Celtics end up doing after free agency, like it wasn't really going to be a big splashy move, just because of the way the roster was constructed and the way it was set up. So I think they're happy, just the fact that you kind of generally came out with a positive asset. Like Carsen Edwards and Kris Dunn were not moving the needle at all. I don't think Hernangomez necessarily does either, but maybe a little bit more on the positive side, which, hey, why not? You're back down to 15 too, so you got the contract out of the way as well. So it's a few positives I think that Celtics fans could be kind of happy about.
Yeah, you think like Jabari was doing like fist pumps after this deal today when they got down to the 15 players, with knowing that his roster spot is, or his contract's still not guaranteed. But I guess I don't know. But at the same time, they also brought in someone who plays his position too. So it's like, okay, well, they're down to 15, but like, I guess they could still, he's still gonna have to. Yeah, I think training camp will be interesting from that standpoint of like, do they keep that roster spot open like for the year, because they have these TPEs that they might use during the season. So, but obviously if Jabari plays well, then they'll certainly keep him around, because he would be in contention for minutes there. But it'll be an interesting, I think, battle there between all those guys, since I don't know how much minutes are available there, but clearly they're not all going to get to play, and they're all going to want to play.
Yeah, and I think if you're Bruno Fernando, I think you feel better about yourself, but at the same time, like you mentioned, like you're the fourth center on the roster at this point, like barring any changes. Like if the Celtics are likely going to move, and if it isn't Jabari, and if the Celtics want to move a contract, it's still probably going to be Bruno. I think we saw some good things out of him from summer league play, but at the same time, it's like with those TPs, especially, like that's a good point, in that maybe they just want to trade a couple second rounders for another Evan Fournier like player at the trade deadline. So another interesting thing for sure.
It really is. So, I guess we haven't touched on. I mean, there's not too much to touch on with Carsen Edwards here, but I mean, you were only on the beat for a brief part of the Carsen Edwards. You missed the high points of the Carsen Edwards era during his initial summer league. This past summer league, he gave it a go, but he had a couple good games there, but it obviously wasn't like flashing or anything like that. So that's a situation where you just saw the roster and it was just a matter of time, it seemed like.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, you're going into your third year. Like, it's just, if you weren't lining up summer league like you were in year one, I feel like that's just, I mean, very small sample size, but it's just kind of a weird, I guess, because I would see tweets and stuff about Carsen Edwards, the legend of Carsen Edwards in summer league, I think 2019 and stuff, and then you see kind of an underwhelming performance for the most part in 2021. So you're kind of shaking your head a little bit and being like, where do you fit on this roster, especially. Obviously, Ime and Brad seem like they want to prioritize defense, and that's not necessarily Carsen's strong suit. So it was it just felt like the fit and all the extenuating circumstances with contracts and roster spots. Just it really seemed like his days were numbered, and they obviously were. So hopefully he makes it. I mean, I think we talked about it before, in that he'll have a nice career in Europe if that ends up being his path, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either. You can make a lot of money overseas.
It's true. And yeah, it's definitely going. So I don't know if Dunn or Edwards will play in Memphis, period, because they have like 200 guys in that roster. And at least Dunn, will get another chance in, somewhere. Like if they waive him, like someone will pick him up. Carsen Edwards, to your point, like, they've given him some chances here. He just hasn't shown it yet. So it's like you said, it might be an overseas situation for him, but good dude. Hopefully he gets a chance, somewhere else. But again, it wasn't after that initial summer, and good for his agent for getting him those guaranteed years after his big first performance in summer league, because he needed it.
Yeah, well, he was fun to watch at Purdue, so
right.
He has that going on at least.
Exactly. All right, Souichi. So what do we think just in the general roster right now? Do we think it's that they're done? This is it? Or do you think there's still going to be some additional tweaks here as we get into the season, or at least into training camp?
Yeah, I think we both agree. We hope they're done in terms of making this much news on a random Friday, like 4 weeks before training camp. We hope they're done. I think they are, just because, I mean, I guess they, like, things can happen. Like, I know they were kind of in on lower market, and then at least just like, at least had some conversations about that reportedly. So maybe something big happens, but it just feels like at this point they're just kind of gearing up for training camp and seeing where you are in a few months, essentially. Interestingly enough, I was looking at the schedule. Like December is really tough, so I think if they really struggle in December, I think it was like 15 games, 13 are against like teams that made the playoffs last year. It's something crazy like that. And a West Coast swing. So like I think if anything goes there, you might reconsider where you are at the trade deadline. But at this point, it's just kind of like unless it just feels like why would you change? I guess why would you make such a big trade unless it makes sense right now? Just because it feels like you're building towards something for the future at least. Just core, like you look at the core with Robb and Marcus and the two J's, and you look at the contract extensions and everything, and it's just you're also kind of limited in the sense that you just extended them, and obviously that you can't trade them for I believe it is until January. So it just feels like you your hands are kind of strapped, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I think Brad set out to have some flexibility for the future, and I think that's what they got. So it just doesn't make. I feel like it doesn't make much sense. I might, who knows? Like as we've seen this offseason, they can just do whatever they want at any time on like 8 p.m. Monday. Maybe like 8 p.m. Monday Labor Day. It's just kind of like some craziness happens. Like who knows? But for the most part, I think they're looking pretty good to stand pat for at least the foreseeable future.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, again, this last move was a situation where now you just look at the depth chart, it just like makes sense. Like they have pretty much their parts covered in each spot. Can they make upgrades? Absolutely. But is there any realistic options right now in the free agent market? No. And then, like you said, you signed all these guys to extensions, so you can't really trade anyone that would have any decent value that you'd be potentially interested in moving at this point. So they still do have that two-way spot. So I'm curious to see where they go with that. We've goodbye Taco Fall is a nice run. Nice to see him land in Cleveland, but I'm curious to go like what position they do with that spot. Because I mean, the Celtics haven't gotten much out of that spot in the last couple of years, but if you look around the league, like there's a lot of you can get pretty useful players there that again you can sign to that can earn NBA contracts now. And now that the NBA is kind of change the rules of two-way deals where guys can be up more of the year, like you wonder how much of an impact a guy can make there if it's just someone who can, is an experienced college player that knows how to help right, like kind of like Hauser did, like you wrote about, someone who could shoot the three, but also can help in other ways too.
Yeah, I didn't realize two-way contracts actually made quite a bit of money. Oh, I knew that, but I was like, actually seeing
Yeah,
it
it's
at like
gone up.
460K, I was like, okay,
right.
that is not bad. I was like,
No.
all right, okay, yeah. Taco and Tremont was they were doing pretty good out there for the last couple of years. Yeah, I think they might look maybe. I don't know. I think they might look at guard just because. I mean, we obviously saw Yam Madar got essentially offered the second two-way spot, so they might be going that. I mean, Brad did mention at the press conference a few weeks ago that they might just wait it out, like after cuts during training camp and stuff. And you look at a team like Memphis, and they have like 25 people or something crazy. Like maybe these teams are waving and cutting a lot of people who the Celtics are interested in. So I think that's probably the realistic path, unless they're maybe they're working out a few guys or just looking at a few guys right now. But for the most part, I think you kind of hope for something pretty good. I know the Pistons or someone had like Saban Lee, who was pretty good, and he ended up kind of panning out in the sense that he was former second rounder, played at Vanderbilt like Neesmith and stuff. So you kind of hope for that, but at the same time, I just think it'll be difficult. It's I feel like the Celtics are so deep, like the expectations aren't very high for obvious reasons, but they're so deep, so it's a little harder maybe for a two-way contract guy to make their mark compared to maybe even last year where COVID and injuries pretty much decimated the team. So it's an interesting spot to be though.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is they are because you're gonna now have to almost every spot on the roster now. There's not a big hole there anymore. Like last year, there's opportunity everywhere, like you said, with COVID. And I mean, that could happen again if there is another, obviously we're seeing teams around different sports right now have pretty significant COVID outbreaks, even when they're vaccinated, which is, unfortunate to see. So, but you're like depth matters now, but they're better set up this year. So whoever that guy is, they're probably gonna be spending more time in Maine than they will be with the big club. But, again, any given week, a couple guys go down with COVID or whatever, like that could become a relevant person in a hurry.
The Maine Celtics.
Maine Celtics.
That's so good.
I know. Oh man, I didn't even think about that. I'm gonna make that mistake. I might just still call them Red Claws for just until.
That's just so perfect. when I saw the rebrand, I was like, I think I had lived here for like 2 months, and I was like, that doesn't really make sense. They'll probably like, I think they'll probably like move it within the next few years. That might be why, but still disappointing for
Right. It
the
probably makes
main
sense for like
brands.
jersey like sales and stuff like that too. Like
Hmm.
it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a main Celtics jersey might sell a little bit more than a main Red Claw jersey, but who knows? But maybe that's become a collector item now. Um, and now, so that's we're I can't believe we're only 3 weeks away from training camp, Souichi. This is kind of the scary part here for us at least, but it'll be an intriguing. I mean, what else are you going to look for in training camp? Besides, we already talked about like the power forward, minutes battle there. But what else? What's another intriguing subplot you'll be looking for here as we kind of ramp up here?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what guard looks like, just because we know Marcus and Jalen. I guess Jalen's more of a wing, but I'm just wondering, like, will Josh Richardson start? Will Dennis Schroeder start? Like, what happens with Peyton? Like, I feel like there's a lot of kind of smaller things. Like, it's not going to make or break the team necessarily. Like, I think regardless of if Josh Richardson or Dennis Schroeder or somebody else starts, like, they're still going to get like Brad said, like they have 7 guys who can start and finish games, and I think obviously that matters a lot in the NBA and everything. But I'm curious just to see how those minutes shake out, especially because they're kind of similar archetype of players. Dennis obviously gets a lot of playmaking, which I'm kind of curious to see how that works. I keep writing this in articles, but Shooter actually averaged 0.1 assists per game more than Marcus Smart did last season. I was like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, that's kind of I think that's kind of a low key good thing, just because obviously they struggle with that a lot, and Ime's talked a lot about team basketball. But I'm curious to see what they do with Peyton Pritchard, just because maybe he can play around with the defensive lineup, but he can kind of be kind of a scoring guard off the bench who can give you quick points like summer league maybe. Like he's not afraid to shoot it, so let's pretty much see how it goes. And I'm curious to see how Romeo, like what they do with Romeo, just because I felt like in summer league they talked a lot about putting the ball in his hands more, and that's kind of a tough ask with the actual NBA club. But maybe they'll give him some chance to be kind of a playmaking, or at least a playmaker, and giving him the ball a little bit more. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, it's deep now, especially compared to a few weeks ago. I mean, we were a summer league when Schroeder got signed, and that kind of sent a few ripples through the team. So I think the guard rotation should be fun to watch, especially with I think Marcus it's always just fun to watch with how chaotic he plays. So that definitely helps things.
yeah. I think it's a really interesting point about Schroeder, and also with Romeo too, because they're like, yeah, put the ball in his hands more. But then there's a lot of guys in this roster that will probably want the ball in their hands, like
Yeah.
both as distributors and
Mhm.
playmakers. So where exactly Romeo fits into that bunch will be interesting to watch, and especially since I think even with all the young guys, there's probably not going to be enough minutes for everyone off the bench
Yeah.
here with the additions they've made. But we will have plenty of time to break it down. Again, follow Souichi Terada on Twitter and check his stuff out at Mass Live. Appreciate you coming on for the emergency trade pod here, and enjoy hopefully the last couple weeks of what should be a quiet offseason, sir.
Yeah, you too. Hopefully it is hopefully it didn't jinx it there.
Right. So we'll stay having that. But yep. And yep, check us out at Winning Plays Pod on Twitter.